So I want to do something a little bit different on this channel. I got a bunch of footage from a project I did, which you may have seen on my channel, involved building this pavilion or some house, or you might call it different things in your language, but it's a place to sit and enjoy and look at the view and chill in the summer, and it protects us from the sun and the rain, which we don't actually have very much of. And this is a bit of a departure for the channel, but I wanted to tell this story and I think it'd be useful for someone. And this isn't a how-to guide. This is just a log of what happened, how we did it, and hopefully it'll inspire somebody and give you an idea of how you might go about building something like this on a hillside, of course. But to get the full story, we need to go back to 2020. So when we bought our hillside property in about 2017, what quickly became obvious was this lawn area in front of the house was quite limited. It was on a slope, and not only is the area behind the grapevines, you can see there, sloped off, the ground already starts to slope from that pine tree you see to the left of it. It's all sloped, so we couldn't really sit on there properly, couldn't put a chair or tables on there properly. We had to kind of prop them up and stuff. The kids always losing their balls down there and so on. So that whole sort of arc shape just represented a lot of wasted space and also annoying slope, yeah. And it's probably not very clear from this picture, but here we're looking up this kind of slope and my son's standing like at the bottom of it looking up onto the lawn. So it's quite a steep slope where this fig tree is. And here's a kind of close up from up top again, looking down onto the neighbour's fence. You can't really see very clearly again, but that's after we started doing a bit of digging, and you can see down slope to the neighbour's fence there. So it's quite a difference in height, anything up to 1.5 meters, 2 meters. So the idea came about to build a kind of deck or pavilion. I knew right from the outset that I didn't want it to be something hastily built and, you know, just using poor quality materials. I wanted it to be something that's going to last and that's going to look nice as well. And I'd been watching a lot of timber framing videos around the time, and I just knew that I wanted to build a timber frame, even though I knew nothing about it whatsoever other than what I'd seen on YouTube. So I put together this sketch, which didn't have the roof on it right now. I'd get to the roof later. And I just wanted an idea of what it would look like and what sort of dimensions. But we had a lot of work to do before we could even think about building the actual deck and pavilion structure. Now around that time it so happened that our new neighbour decided to fence off his property, even though we'd never had fences before. And suddenly, because of the slope that went all the way down to his property line basically, we could no longer get through here. I don't have a picture of that, but we had to carve this path out first. And this kind of prompted the beginning of the building of the retaining wall, which we were going to need to build to bring the level from here up to the height where we needed the deck. This retaining wall didn't really have to be fully engineered because it's not retaining anything. This soil's going nowhere, but I wanted to do a proper job of it and make sure it was safe and everything. So we started digging some pretty beefy foundations for this wall, which was going to come up, as I said, almost 2 meters at some points. And this digging the trench for the foundation for the retaining wall took most of the rest of summer 2020, as we didn't start at the beginning of the summer by any means. But by March, early March 2021, it was time to pick up the work again as the weather was nice enough. And you can see here where I started digging at trenches at right angles as well, so we got a kind of C shape in the end because we were going to pour footings or a kind of small retaining wall along here too. Okay, so this is what the summer house looks like one rainy day, May 2021. Will it ever be ready? I don't know. Currently digging out post footings, whatever you call them, and small channels to make a beam to tie together the footings so they don't move about. Chucking this huge pile of earth which I dumped here. Now I've got to chuck it over there because I need to dig some footings and stuff here as well.
The hole here is way bigger than I needed, but anyway, it's kind of done now. And all it needs, all it needs now is formwork, followed by, well, rebar, more formwork, and then get the cement in. So it's probably been at least like 10 or 12 solid days work, I guess, counting the stuff I did last year on and off. Yeah, and somehow we've got to get a wall up to this string line at some point, backfill all this, and then actually start thinking about some house, because this is just the foundations. There we go, May 2021.
So that's where we were then. And you may have noticed in a few of the shots this drain pipe. That was the sewage line that goes to the septic tank. I knew it would be around here somewhere, so I dug carefully around here. And sure enough, I found it. And we had to work around and build around that carefully. So we put these clay blocks around it and then something over the top and then poured the cement. So theoretically, we could still access it by smashing up these clay blocks later if we really need to. So here I'm leveling the foundations for the footer, and we're going to put mesh rebar down inside it. It's probably not necessary. We're not really in seismic territory, but we do get the odd earthquake, and it's usually done around here. We usually put rebar in the footer, and it's usually this mesh stuff. And the mesh was lifted off the bottom by these plastic chairs. And of course you've noticed also that the foundation was stepped because we're going downhill, so we had to step it down. And of course if you're doing steps, you have to put in shuttering to account for the drops as well. Now of course you can't just lay down the mesh for the footer. You have to tie in the upright rebar as well for the wall. And this mesh is what we use around here for reinforcing walls. It's perfectly acceptable for small projects like this. And but we did a double layer, which was kind of on the advice of my engineer friend, although it's again probably complete overkill for a wall like this. I don't mind telling you this was one of the hardest parts to get right and took the longest and was very laborious and very difficult getting inside that hole, tying in all the rebar, the uprights to the footer section, bending it up, tying it up and all that. I won't bore you with the details, but we poured the concrete footer once the upright mesh was in place, and that was all hand mixed and took a fair while, took a day to do that, but we got that all done. Oh yes, and you'll see the upright rebar for posts as well. I did several posts along there, fully kind of engineered posts. Again, not sure if it's necessary, but it's certainly going to be strong. Of course, eventually the mesh was going to come up the full height of the wall, up to where the posts are as well. But, well, as you've already seen, I'd started putting in some shuttering, and by now here we pretty much have the back portion of the shuttering, the formwork, in the part that's up against the hill. And this part where I'm delving in here was up against this fig tree. I really didn't want to dig up the fig tree, dig the hill out. So I wanted to keep everything intact. So everything I did had to be done inside this trench, and it was really, really awkward. But I'm glad I stuck with it, and I saved the fig tree, and the fig tree is just doing great now. And I did some pretty hefty formwork, and the sort of nails and wires you can see were I forget what they're called, but it was just a way to hold the front and back of the formwork together. And here you're looking at the back part of the formwork that faces the hill. We hadn't done the front yet. Before we do the front part of the formwork, we had to get the rest of the mesh up. So we've got the double layer here tied in, overlapping the lower portion and bent up over the top. So it's really, really strong. And if you're wondering about the green plastic, that was just to give us a really nice smooth wall when we poured the concrete. That was unfortunately not how things turned out, but a little bit more about that later.
9th of August, this front formwork is finally done, at least the basic structure. Still got to do plenty of work strengthening it. We've got the level about right, we've got the corner about where it's supposed to be. It's out a few centimeters, but I just can't deal anymore. I'll just have to you know, I don't think it will matter in the finished product all that much. And just got some front formwork here on the side formwork to do here, and we're done with that, hopefully. So that should be another hour or two's work, and we can get on with the next stage.
Well, the next stage was concrete pouring day, and we couldn't get a pump down there, couldn't order cement, so it all had to be hand mixed. About 7 cubic meters of cement, and well, you've got to get your friends in to do that job, really. I thought I did a good job of the shuttering, but the angled bracing you see over to the left towards the neighbour's fence wasn't really adequate, and the top of the wall did start to bow out slightly by the time we got near the top, which was a really amateur mistake to make, and I'm kind of angry at myself, but actually relieved that the top didn't blow out, or it just would have been an absolute disaster. As it is, the wall is slightly bowed, but it's really no big deal at the end of the day. And you know, here in Serbia people do a lot of cement work by themselves, and it's pretty usual to get your friends round to do a cement pour day and just mix it all up by hand. The only thing is, of course, doing it by hand, it's not as consistent as if it was brought in a mixer from, you know, a supply place that does it and mixes it properly. And so it was a bit rough in places, but you know, we had a nice day, ate some food, you know, hung out together and poured some concrete. It was good. And there's a lot of improvisation as well when you're doing this, but it's less stressful than a truck coming and wanting to pump it all out and go, and you're running around trying to stop the wall blowing out and a million other little things, including, of course, little improvisations like this. The old baking tray method. And this was actually about 5 days later. The cement had well and truly cured, and we're starting to take the shuttering off. A lot of it I had to cut off, and it ended up being sacrificial. I knew I wasn't going to get that out anyway. And here you see the disaster with the green nylon. It got all scrunched up and got all caught up in the actual cement, so it didn't make it smooth at all. It just made it worse, and I had to get as much of it off as possible, but I just left most of it, or a lot of it, in the end. And here was my son helping somehow, and it was very hot, so we kept on hosing down the concrete just to make sure nothing cracked. And you can see I had actually managed to pull off most of that nylon off the back, but it left some really nasty holes in some of them. You could even see the rebar, which is a massive disaster, but look, I patched it up. It'll be fine. Even if water makes it to the rebar, I really doubt it's going to cause enough damage in my lifetime, or even the lifetime of my kids, to worry about. And here my other son was helping backfill, but we ended up deciding it wasn't really necessary. And this wall and the footers really were the hardest part of that project, because we weren't done yet. I needed to do a slab here, which is where a barbecue grill is going to come eventually, and then do more post holes for footers, and also tie them all together with rebar, which was again probably overkill, but I decided to do it anyway. And you can see the floor plan of the deck is really starting to take shape now. But it was so much work, as you can see, and I did most of it by myself. And here now you can see the kind of front view of the wall with most of the formwork taken off, and you can see now finally the shape. And you can't really tell that it's bowed out a little bit. Maybe you can. But you can see the pattern, shall we call it that, on the front where I took the nylon off and where I'd patched up some of the holes where rebar was showing through. Ugh. And some more pictures where you can see the floor plan again, as I said, really taking shape now. You can see exactly where the deck's going to be with the footers. However, we still had to pour the footers, the connecting beams, and the slab for the barbecue area. So we weren't done quite yet for this year. And although there was quite a lot of concrete to do there, it was nowhere near as much as the wall. And so it was time for the whole family to get involved again, including some members who hadn't done any mixing thus far. And so we got most of the rest of the foundations done, except for the slab, while the weather was still nice. Some neat concrete work done there by my son, smoothing over one of the footers. And yeah, we had to dig out some foundations for this concrete slab as well, and of course put the rebar and everything. And I dug some fairly deep foundations because I wanted to be really sure this wasn't all going to go sliding down the hill, because it's right on the edge of a hillside there. So I probably went overkill with this as well, but what are you going to do? This was one of the last jobs I did at the end of summer, and the weather just started to turn and we just got everything done just in time. And this was the finished slab, and the whole foundation of the deck finished. And that was a really hard summer's work, 2021. A lot of work doing that. It doesn't look like much now, but for one person to do who has no experience building walls, concrete, rebar, any of that stuff, I'm pretty proud of it. But of course, all this was just to get us up to the level where we could actually build our deck. And that's where we're going to pick up in the next video and start with 2022, when I began building the actual deck itself. And I know it's maybe frustrating for the video to end here, not to have the whole build, but honestly it would go on for a really long time. And actually I've got all the footage and the next part will be coming out soon, and in the meantime it'd be great to hear some questions and queries that people have, which I can then answer in the second video. And I'm sure you have questions, whether you're new to something like this or you're an expert builder and you want to ask, like, why the heck did you do this or do that? And I didn't have time to address everything. I didn't have time to address, how I took the measurements, how I got everything square, how I tied the rebar together, what grade cement I used or concrete, which I, to be honest, can't even remember anymore. So put any questions you have in the comments and I'll try to answer them in part 2, which is coming soon.